these trees, mostly woody species, colonizing tropical intertidal shores, and they are very special in the sense that they can tolerate inundation by seawater all the time, and they live as big trees, some growing to 30 meters tall in soft mud. And so some of these common species, I suspect that most of these species shown here are actually found in India as well. They also have very special adaptations for things like reproduction and also taking care of the excessive salt that they're exposed to. So mangroves as ecosystems also support very beautiful organisms other than the trees themselves. And some of them are actually quite endangered. For example, this picture of the species Sonorachia griffithii is actually an endangered species of mangrove. But it produces very, very beautiful, showy flowers. And on the right, this is actually a muskipper, actually displaying its beauty and doing acrobatics on the soft mud. And there are actually many, many interesting species. Some of them are actually commercially important as food species and all species providing a lot of the goods and services of mangrove ecosystems that are associated with these magnificent ecosystems. Taking a look at the location of the world mangroves, this is actually a relatively old database from FAO some time ago. But it serves to illustrate the point that most of the mangroves in the world are actually located in developing countries. In this picture is in this table of the top 15 countries where mangroves actually occur in the world. The ones with the red arrows, like in Indonesia, Nigeria, Malaysia, and including India, which is ranked 11th in the world, actually support the most amount of mangrove ecosystem in the world in terms of area. So out of the top 15 countries where mangroves actually are most abundant, actually all except 3 are in the developing world. And you can actually imagine what sort of pressure there will be on these mangrove ecosystems because there are just too many competing users of these habitats. As many of you would already know, mangrove forests and the associated wetlands like seagrasses and coral reefs along the land sea gradient actually offer very significant ecosystem services in terms of providing important goods like fishery products and timber products to supporting the production of fisheries, like acting as nurseries, or they protect the coasts from typhoons and storm surges and tsunamis and so on, to regulating nutrient cycles and even to more subtle services like cultural services for recreation and actually something not easily quantifiable. We are actually quite familiar with the provisioning and supporting services of mangroves. For example, the structural complexity offered by the mangrove roots are ideal places for hiding for juvenile fish from predators like these when the high tide comes in. And so this complexity is unique to the mangrove trees as far as intertidal habitats are concerned. And we all know that mangroves actually produce a lot of important fishery products as well as forestry products that would actually be very critical to coastal communities. Here are actually a few examples, some including actually from your part of the world that are coming from mangroves. And as I said before, the complex 3D structure of mangrove habitats would provide protection to juvenile lectin and other small invertebrates, including some endangered species. Like, for example, in our part of the world, in Hong Kong, then we have juvenile horseshoe crabs, 2 to 3 species of them actually found associated with the mangrove environment when they're small. And mangroves also regulate the climate by doing things that are actually quite subtle. For example, you may not realize that mangroves actually can ameliorate the force of storm surges and even tsunamis and from typhoons by offering very, very complicated three-dimensional structures. These are mostly aerial roots coming from different species. And you can actually have a reduction of 30% of the hydraulic pressure associated with waves just for 100-meter width of a mangrove forest. And so these are actually some of the very significant services. And as I said, one of the more appreciated but subtle service of mangrove ecosystems is the ability to sequester and also store a great deal of carbon from the atmosphere in the soil, primarily underground. And this is also another very important regulating service of coastal wetlands, including mangroves. And mangroves can actually store, on average, between 3 to 5 times more carbon than terrestrial forests, mainly because they have a very productive system on the one hand, and also on the other hand, the soil condition in mangroves are usually quite acidic as well as anoxic, actually deterring very fast decomposition and therefore allowing the carbon to store and also stay in the sediment for a long time. And so the last thing I'd like to show to you is actually an even more subtle and not commonly appreciated value of mangroves, is that, well, the cultural service of mangroves. This was a picture taken of a mangrove dominated by only 2 species of mangroves in New Caledonia in the South Pacific by 2 species, as I said, Rhizophora stylosa and Avicennia marina. And you may say, well, this is actually just a very ordinary mangrove, not too high, the trees, and they are very sparse. But if I show you the next picture, then you might realize that this actually has some important cultural value, not only to the locals, but if you actually happen to be fortunate enough to be able to fly over this patch of mangrove wetland with your fiancé, then you could actually have a much better chance of proposing and get a yes from the person. And so this is actually another aspect of mangrove importance. Well, let me get back to our question today, the threat to losing functional mangroves. Actually, the story began about 13, 14 years ago when we published with a number of other authors in the journal Science a short piece entitled A World Without Mangroves. And here are actually some of the co-authors of that piece. And it actually, we were using that piece at a time to warn about the destruction of mangrove ecosystem worldwide. And there is a fast loss rate of mangroves everywhere in the world at that time. And we were concerned about actually not having a lot of mangrove forests left in the future. We were actually not quite right, because we know that now mangroves actually have recovered from the previous very fast loss, and in some countries there may actually be even a net growth in the area of mangroves. By the way, this is actually one of the most highly cited articles that I've actually jointly authored, and is really catching some attention. But what I'm saying today is that we should now be going beyond just looking at the loss of mangrove area. We should be more concerned about losing functional mangrove ecosystems also. Why should we be worried about losing functional mangroves? There are a few reasons why we probably would be heading that direction. For example, we do not have very good functional indicators for mangrove ecosystems. There is an over-reliance on area of the habitat of the forest as an indicator of ecosystem status. You may have actually a lot of mangrove areas, but this does not mean that the mangroves are really functional or being able to offer the beneficial services that they promise. there are actually problems with, for example, poorly planned and poorly executed restoration efforts. And there are also additional problems, like, for example, lack of context sensitivity in mangrove conservation strategy, lack of a loss of habitat connectivity, and things like urbanization, pollution, and so on are actually imposing very significant stresses on coastal habitats like mangroves. You can actually see from this diagram here on the bottom right, this is a picture taken of southern China, where very intense urbanization is taking place. You can actually see that there are a few major problems associated with the mangroves here. This is a mangrove tree. You may say, wow, this is quite a big tree, so what problem is there? This is actually an exotic species introduced into southern China. And also you have very extensive seawalls backing onto high rises housing a lot of people. You also have a fence actually built to enclose the mangroves inside. And so this is actually something very common these days on many urbanizing coastlines. And this, as I said before, illustrates a number of issues concerning mangrove conservation at the moment. And so I'm going to actually talk about some of these issues one by one in this very short talk today. Well, if you look at mangrove conservation, a lot of times people would think about planting as the easiest way to improve mangrove ecosystem conditions. As I said, people are actually generally obsessed with mangrove area. Well, I don't disagree that area of the forest is an important indicator of how much mangrove surface or functional mangrove there may be, but it cannot really represent function or functionality of the habitat itself. And so there has been also a lot of problems with mangrove restoration projects, especially the larger the projects, usually the bigger the issues. For example, mangroves were planted at the wrong tidal elevation, in the wrong hydrological regime, too much water flow, too little water flow. And you may also have different types of substrate that the mangroves would normally grow in. And sometimes mangroves are planted in seagrass beds. You're basically just trying to restore one useful habitat by destroying another. And that would, of course, be very bad. Wrong species may be used. For example, introduction of exotic species that can change the ecology of the whole place, and so on. And there are also problems like the lack of monitoring of functional development. So as a matter of fact, as I said, most large-scale planting have failed so far, leading to a lot of waste of energy, money, and effort. And at the same time, you still see in some countries that there are extensive conversion of natural forests to other land uses. For example, in Indonesia, one of the countries where aquaculture is fast developing, then you see huge areas of mangroves being turned into tidal shrimp ponds, which may actually look like this 10 years later. And these abandoned shrimp ponds are really hotspots for carbon dioxide emission. And so you are not only destroying the basis of carbon sequestration and storage, but you're also producing a new source of carbon emission as a result of this management practice. Luckily, we do have fighters in the world that are helping to actually reverse the trend. For example, these are two members of the IUCN Mangrove Specialist Group trying to actually replant mangroves in abandoned aquaculture ponds through the Mangrove Action Project. Another threat that is increasingly important in Asia is the conversion of mangroves in large scales to oil palm plantations. This is actually a picture of Sabah in eastern Malaysia. You can actually see huge areas of oil palm plantation actually encroaching into the mangrove areas in this part of Malaysia. And I suppose this is not actually just happening in Malaysia, but also in other parts of Southeast Asia or South Asia as well, potentially including Asia, India. And as a matter of fact, for example, Indonesia, you find that only recently there were over 400,000 hectares of Indonesia's mangroves already converted for oil palm plantations. And you may also have threats caused by exotic species introduction. For example, encroachment by the codgrass from the US, Spartina in southern China. Actually, you see tufts of the Spartina grass growing on previous mudflats in China, this part of China, where people used to collect wild razor clams as their livelihood. But now, this whole place is changed dramatically by this introduction of Spartina. So the mangrove forest is just behind the mudflat, and I went back 5 years later to the same place, same location, take the picture again. You can actually see the whole mudflat is now choked with Spartina. And this actually is what I call mangrove squeezing, because the mangroves cannot actually extend seaward as they normally do. With accretion of the mudflat, the mangroves would actually gradually migrate with their propagules colonizing the bare mudflat in time, and then be able to survive in the long term. But with the Spartina encroaching from seaward side, and there is a road in the back of the mangroves, then the mangrove belt is increasingly squeezed and they cannot really expand. And in the long run, with sea level rise, for example, predicted because of climate change, then there could be disastrous consequences for these mangroves. And also as a result of the loss of the natural collecting habitat for the razor clams, the farmers are turning to create more ponds in the mangrove areas and the upper intertidal areas to culture them. And this is driving, obviously, a vicious circle to the detriment of the mangrove habitats. So exotic species are actually just causing a lot of havoc to mangrove ecosystems in, for example, China. You can see from this picture here, these are the native species, rather slow growing. These pointed, the arrow ones, are actually the exotic species Sonoratia apetala, introduced from Bangladesh into southern China, and they grow so much faster than the native species. But in terms of their capacity for services, they are not necessarily any better. For example, our research has suggested that Sonoratia, although they grow very quickly above ground, their root system is not as elaborate as the native species, and they also do not attain very high densities. And as a result, the total carbon stored by the exotic species is actually less than that of the native species in general. And so, well, don't be fooled by short-term gains like planting fast-growing exotic species. You might actually regret it very strongly later on because of the other problems that they cause. There are also big problems concerning the survival of coastal wetlands in general in places where urbanization is rampant. For example, there is a new Great Wall in China. We all know the Great Wall of China going for thousands of kilometers in northern China on land. But another revolution or change occurring along the Chinese coast is that there is so much seawall construction on the coast of China that is now China's new Great Wall, because the seawall added together along the Chinese coast is now longer than that of the original Great Wall. And so you may have problems like the loss of hydrologic conductivity between the tidal stream and the coastal wetlands that may still be able to survive for a short time behind the seawalls. You may also have other problems actually located in the same area. We all know that urbanization is or coastal urbanization is a global trend. And again, this is actually the megacities with more than 10 million people, their location in the world. And you can look at the arrows again, then, well, you find that most of the red arrows, which are actually tropical to subtropical megacities, including many from India, they actually are located on the coast, and they could actually be competing for valuable habitats with the natural mangroves. And in countries which are so densely populated like China and India, then this is a real concern. And so estuaries are traditionally the preferred human settlement areas. And you can see and imagine how important the conservation, planning, and management of mangroves would be in the light of continued urbanization. So, for example, where I am at the moment, in Hong Kong, we actually have a modest sized mangrove forest, highly protected on the Hong Kong shores, but we are bordering a big city, Shenzhen city, actually more than 10 million people on the other side of Hong Kong. This is not Hong Kong, this is actually mainland China. Hong Kong, of course, is part of China, but it is actually on the back of this photograph. And you see, this is actually a very important migration stopover ground for birds along the East Asia Australasian flyway. So birds, tens of thousands of them, would actually fly from Siberia to places like Australia and New Zealand every year, and they stop over in places like Hong Kong. And for those of you who may not understand bird migration that much, what I can tell you is that these birds, although they actually fly over distances of 6,000 kilometers one way, they only stop a limited number of times and locations for refueling and roosting on their journey. And well, this wetland in here, the mudflats, actually annually will support more than 60,000 migratory birds, and sometimes up to 100,000 migratory birds every winter. And so imagine if continued urbanization and pollution would affect the integrity and the productivity of this mangrove forest and the associated wetland systems, then the birds' migration journey could actually be endangered. And if they cannot actually have enough food to refuel on their migration, then their reproduction might actually fail. And so, but talking about all these problems, I don't think we have a lost plot yet. As I said, we have problems of risking the threat of losing functional mangroves because of wrong restoration approaches, because of the over-obsession with area being the only indicator of mangrove condition in the world, because of urbanization and associated changes like pollution, the building of seawalls, the loss of biodiversity, and so on. But we have hope. For example, our friends in the mangrove specialist group recently published a paper in Current Biology, a short paper, looking at actually some optimism for mangrove conservation, with caution that, well, we have to do things right continuously. Otherwise, the same old problem of extensive mangrove loss might actually continue into the future. There are also very significant international initiatives, recent initiatives, that actually would promote mangrove conservation and application of science to the conservation of mangrove ecosystems and their management. For example, the Global Mangrove Alliance is the conglomeration of many of the world's largest conservation organizations like WWF, IUCN, Wetlands International, and so on. They have very ambitious targets for mangrove conservation and restoration. But of course, we have to be careful, not placing too much emphasis on area while actually under evaluating the functional significance of mangroves in our restoration effort. We also have now very good global database on where mangroves are and the trend, whether they are increasing in area or decreasing in area through, for example, the Global Mangrove Watch. And those of you who may not have seen this, you should actually have a look, because it is a very impressive database. You also have the Blue Carbon Initiative, based on the idea that mangroves are very important blue carbon storage areas. And so we should actually factor in their conservation in the management plan or carbon neutrality plans for all countries. So, well, in closing, I'd just like to actually suggest a few action points for sustaining mangrove functionality. I think it's important that we have a multi-pronged approach to mangrove conservation. We do not really just look at rises and falls in mangrove area. We actually would need to base our restoration and management efforts purely on science. And we actually should prioritize conservation of diverse mangrove forests before planting. We should not use planting as a excuse for actually continuing the destruction of diverse functional mature forest. And we should try and enhance capacity for function rather than just total area. And restoration work must be strongly underpinned by science and should also be context sensitive. And we should have the scientists to work on developing ecosystem level practical indicators for mangrove ecosystem condition, rather than having to continually rely on area as an indication of function. And we also should actually risk-proof mangrove ecosystems, for example, from coastal squeeze, from urban development, and also the introduction of exotic species, and so on. And we should also formulate management plans for the coastal zone with mangrove conservation in mind, especially for countries like India, where you actually have great mangrove resources that few countries in the world actually have the fortunate situation to be in. And so I just, it is only a very short talk, so I don't mean to actually talk too much detail about all this, but I'll be very happy to join the discussion in the panel discussion later on. And so these are my comrades in mangrove conservation, part of the IUCN Mangrove Specialist Group, the picture taken a couple of years back. And we have the Indian representative here, Professor Kathiresan. I think most of you would know him. He's done a lot of great work on mangrove ecosystems. And so I thank you for listening, and I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us with your deep knowledge and insights on the conservation of mangroves. Thank you, sir. Now we are heading for the inaugural speech. The chief guest of today's event is the Honorable Forest Minister of Kerala, Sri A.K. Shashindran. I welcome you all to listen to his inaugural address now.
ബഹുമാന്യരെ, ഇന്ന് ലോകം അന്താരാഷ്ട്ര കണ്ടൽ ദിനമായി ആചരിക്കുകയാണ്. വേലിയേറ്റ സ്വാധീനമുള്ള മേഖലകളിൽ വളരുന്ന സവിശേഷമായ ആവാസ വ്യവസ്ഥയാണ് കണ്ടൽ. തനതും ദേശാടകരവുമായ വളരെ വൈവിധ്യമാർന്ന ജീവികൾ കണ്ടൽ ആവാസ വ്യവസ്ഥയിൽ കാണപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ട്. അതിലുപരിയായി പ്രാദേശിക ജനതയുടെ സുസ്ഥിരമായ നിലനിൽപ്പിന് കണ്ടലുകൾ വളരെ പ്രാധാന്യമർഹിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. നമ്മുടെ കടലിനെയും പുഴയെയും കായലിനെയും ഇവിടെയുള്ള മത്സ്യസമ്പത്ത് കണ്ടലിനെ ആശ്രയിച്ചാണ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. മീൻ, ചെമ്മീൻ, ഞണ്ട്, കക്ക തുടങ്ങിയവയുടെ ആവാസവും പ്രജനന കേന്ദ്രങ്ങളുമാണ് ഈ കണ്ടൽ കാടുകൾ. സുനാമി, ചുഴലിക്കാറ്റ്, പ്രളയം എന്നിവയെ പ്രതിരോധിക്കാൻ കണ്ടലിനുള്ള ശേഷി എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാവുന്നതാണ്. ഈ അടുത്ത കാലത്ത് 2 വലിയ പ്രളയങ്ങൾ നേരിടേണ്ടി വന്ന ജനതയാണ് നമ്മൾ. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ കണ്ടൽ സംരക്ഷണം കേരള സർക്കാരിൻ്റെ മുഖ്യ പരിഗണനയിലൊന്നാണ്. ഇതിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായി കഴിഞ്ഞ വർഷം ഏതാണ്ട് 831 ഏക്കറോളം വരുന്ന കണ്ടൽ പ്രദേശത്തെ റിസർവ് വനമായി സംസ്ഥാന സർക്കാർ പ്രഖ്യാപിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. തുടർന്ന് കേരളം ആവിഷ്കരിച്ച് നടപ്പിലാക്കുന്ന റീബിൽഡ് കേരള പദ്ധതിയിൽ ഇത് ഉയർത്തി കാണിക്കുന്നുമുണ്ട്. നിലവിലുള്ള കണ്ടൽ മേഖലകൾ സംരക്ഷിക്കാനും നാശം തടയാനും കേരള വനം വകുപ്പ് പ്രതിജ്ഞാബദ്ധമാണ്. ഈ വഴിക്കുള്ള ചെറുതും വലുതുമായ ധാരാളം പദ്ധതികൾ വകുപ്പിൻ്റെ കീഴിൽ സംസ്ഥാനത്തിൻ്റെ വിവിധ മേഖലകളിൽ നടത്തിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഇന്ന് നടക്കുന്ന ചർച്ച ഈ സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ വളരെയേറെ പ്രാധാന്യപ്പെട്ടതാണ്. ഇവയിലൂടെ കണ്ടൽ സംരക്ഷണത്തിൻ്റെ പുതിയ ആശയങ്ങൾക്ക് രൂപകൽപ്പന നൽകാനും പ്രായോഗികമായ അതിൻ്റെ നടത്തിപ്പ് സംബന്ധിച്ച മാർഗരേഖകൾ കണ്ടെത്താനും കഴിയുമെന്ന് ഞാൻ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നു. ഏറെ സന്തോഷത്തോടെ നിങ്ങളുടെ എല്ലാവരുടെയും അനുമതിയോടെ ഈ പരിപാടിയുടെ ഉദ്ഘാടനം നിർവഹിച്ചതായി അറിയിക്കുന്നു. നിങ്ങൾക്കെല്ലാവർക്കും എൻ്റെ ആശംസകൾ.
Thank you, sir. Now I kindly welcome Mr. Vivek Menon, the Executive Director of Wildlife Trust of India, to address the gathering. Sir.
Yeah, thank you, Remit. Honorable Minister for Forest and Wildlife, Sri Shishindran, respected Head of Forest Force and PCCF, Mr. Keshavan, Senior Forest Officers of Government of Kerala, including Mohit Krishnan and Vinod and others who are here. The IUCN Specialist Group Chair, Jolie, my own colleagues, BC Chaudhary and others, and several experts who have joined in, who will take part in the discussion later. Welcome and I suppose a happy Mangrove Day. I'm not giving a presentation. I'm not going to do one after that brilliant presentation by Joe. I don't think we need another tutorial for the day. But I do want to say a few things. I'm not a great believer in celebrating days for the sake of days. And those of you who know me know that I prefer actually getting my boots dirty and actually doing the work on ground rather than awareness for the sake of awareness. In fact, I have had very little time for awareness because I think this generation that we are seeing, at least the next generation or the next generation from me, who have inherited this world, have enough awareness. They lack participation. They lack the ability of getting involved in stuff because they have 2-minute attention spans. But it's not that they lack awareness on most things. But mangroves is slightly different. Think of two facts that I knew of before I came and heard the brilliant speech by Julie. The Amazon, which the whole world talks about, the Amazon forest, not the Amazon company, but the Amazon forest, cover 4% of this world. of the global surface. Mangroves cover 0.1% or something like that. Yeah. So 15 million hectares, we heard from Jolie as well and from the head of Forest Force, 15 million hectares of mangrove in the world. Let's compare it with the fact that the Forest Department in India plants 19 million hectares of plantation of forests. In India alone, plantation. But there's 15 million hectares of natural mangrove left. Even if you just look at these two statistics, you'll realize how enormous this the challenge of making people realize the importance of mangrove is before us. And then, having listened to Professor Lee, I'm absolutely convinced that these are the stepsister forests of the world. Stepsister, because natural ecosystems are women, according to me. They can't be stepbrothers, but they're stepsister. And they're stepsister ecosystems, in fact. If you include grasslands and wetlands and arid ecosystems to it, these are the things that nobody looks at, and they slip away at what we've just heard, 1 to 2% annually. I'm glad to hear that some part is coming back, but nevertheless, the global loss of that is quite extensive. And then we've heard all these wonderful facts that Professor Lee has put forth before us, including some which I did not know. For example, that 100 meters of mangrove belt can actually reduce 1/3 of wave action. Now, we keep saying that these things stop tsunamis, but I've always been looking for good science to show that, and I'm glad that I was pointed to this paper, which actually says that it can reduce wave action by 30% or nearly 1/3. I started my career on birds, but I never thought of mangroves as migration refuges for birds, really. I mean, you keep thinking of mangroves as, important ecosystems of fish and crab and all that the minister just now said, but nobody thinks of it for birds. Although I started my career in Point Calimere in southern India, ringing birds that were stopping over. But it just didn't occur to me till Professor Lee just pointed out. And Joe, so nice to see Maipo again. After 25 years ago, I was there. I haven't been back since then, but such a lovely mangrove ecosystem that you have. So clearly some awareness is needed. Some awareness is needed really in a targeted fashion. So that's my first broad point. I've just got 2 more points. The other thing is, I'm wearing 2 hats really when I give this talk. One is as founder and executive director of the Wildlife Trust of India. So for Wildlife Trust of India, Wild Lands is one of our key programs, which is basically a program that we had started 22 years ago to buffer the existing protected area system of the government, not to replicate it, not to do anything to what the brilliant protection that the government of India and the state governments give existing forests, but actually to buffer it. So there could be even terrestrial forests which we focused on, for example, elephant corridors, which were outside the protected area system, which we wanted to link up. But there could be these stepsister ecosystems, and really mangroves for us is the thought process of doing mangroves is that. You will notice that we have not done it in state number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We have good mangroves in India. We have chosen Kerala for a reason. We've chosen Kerala because here is a system which, as you heard Mr. Keshavan say, that this is where there is potential. This is where we can show restoration. And for me, that restoration ecology of mangroves being brought back into what Professor Lee calls a functionality or functional ecosystem rather than area is so important. It's so important even in terrestrial forests. To all my forester friends attending, an anecdote which I once was with a former Union Minister of India who was known for his long hair or large hair. But anyway, so he was very happy that day and telling me that, Vivek, see how much forest we have planted. The FSI report was out and saying, how much healthy forest we have. Somehow he used the word healthy. So I said, Minister, that need not necessarily be. You increase the area, but is it healthy? He said, yeah, of course, look at this report. And he was again showing me the FSI report. So I just, off the cuff, like I normally do, I said, Minister, if you have a serious health problem, will you go to a doctor or a barber? So he said, what do you mean, Vivek? Of course, I'll go to a doctor. So I said, yes, because you want your health inside your body to be analyzed, not the amount of hair you have, which you have brilliant hair, everybody knows that, right? So the amount of forest cover is not what we are bothered about in today's world. That is 18th century, that's 19th century. Let's move forward. We have to look at health of what we have, functionality of what we have, and or what we are creating. In mangrove, we may have to create in places like Kerala where we have lost so much. And this functionality, I was very impressed, Mr. Keshavan, by the fact that you talked about the 40 rivers going in as well. So it's not only the 600 kilometers of Kerala, which is a great potential, but the riverbanks of the 40 rivers that go into it at the meeting points of the coast are critical, really. And we should be looking at it in terms of reviving these ecosystems. The second hat that I wear is as Deputy Chair of the SSC of IUCN, of the Species Survival Commission. I myself chair the Elephant Specialist Group, but there are 250 other groups, like the one Jolie is heading on mangroves, which is part of the SSC. And as I've taken over as Deputy Chair, I'm really trying to go outside my elephant comfort zone to look at other areas which need species protection. And I think species protection of mangroves is also important. It's not just important to bring back mangroves per se, but to look at the endangered and threatened species. Now in India, I'm told that there are only 3 threatened species. I'm not a mangrove specialist, but I'm told there is only one critically endangered species, which is Sonratia griffithii, an endangered species, Heritaria, and Brownlonia, a near-threatened species. But all 3 are not on the coast we are talking about. These are eastern coast species for India. They are not west coast species, right? But there are several other things that we can do to take it away from being just a Rhizophora avicennia, Prandan Kandal, as we say in Malayalam, forests, right? Although Professor Lee showed this beautiful picture of a heart forming out of avicennia and Rhizophora, that's good. But I think we can do better than that. I think we can bring back some of the Bruguiera species, at least I like to see. I think they're brilliant species, some of them. Yeah, and Exocaria, for example. And things that we know we have there, but not in the numbers that are enough to contribute to the functionality of the ecosystem. They may not be threatened species today, but they could be tomorrow. And that could be something. There are other threatened species, I'm told, which are sort of mangrove associates, like Lunitaria or some Naipa or Cherryops or whatever. So we can look at that. And it'll be interesting if this project of Wildlife Trust of India and Kerala Forest Department and Apollo Tyres, let me take this opportunity to thank Apollo as being the corporate sponsor of this project as well. This is a unique scheme, as B.C. Chaudhary said, where a civil society organization like ours and the government and a corporate has been working together. So many thanks, Apollo, for payrolling this project thus far. I would like that this project of ours is looked upon as that, as a pilot project that showcases, because the 100 hectares that acres that we're looking at protecting here is not going to change the mangrove conservation of the Indian coast of the world. What we want to do is to create a nursery of these endangered species, so that people could source such species from this area locally. Species that require local protection, as well as show a pilot showcase of what a functional ecosystem could look like, and or what livelihood benefits can come from this, and or how, if tourism comes to that area, which we know Kerala is at the forefront of tourism in India. Incredible India started with Incredible Kerala, actually. But for that, we can try to showcase how tourism into mangrove need not destroy mangroves, and how tourism as a whole, even not into mangroves, but on our beaches and our waterfront, which is the great pleasure of tourists coming to Kerala, need not destroy mangroves, and instead can be a win-win. So with this hope that the small little endeavor of ours is a catalyst for better and bigger things to come, and really so very happy, Professor Lee, that you could join us and represent the specialist group. And also so very, very happy that so many senior officials of the Forest Department, as well as senior officials of the Fisheries and many other departments that I see, who I personally may not know as well, but welcome really. And I really welcome this interdisciplinary approach to celebrate Mangrove Day. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Now I welcome Mr. D.K. Vinod Kumar, CCF of Northern Circle of Kerala Forest Department, to deliver the vote of thanks. Sir.
Thank you, Ramit. A very good morning to all of you. So we have come to the end of this inaugural session, and I have been given the duty to place on record our gratitude to all the distinguished dignitaries as well as the panelists and participants of this program. First of all, I would like to place on record my gratitude to Sri A.K. Shashindran, the Honorable Minister for Forest, who has taken time to give us his address despite his busy schedule in the Legislative Assembly. So I thank Sri A.K. Shashindran, Honorable Minister for Forest. I would like to thank our Head of Forest Force, Sri P.K. Keshavan, IFS, who has given us a very nice insight of what contributions Forest Department can do and what can be the contribution from all the other civil society organizations for conserving the mangroves in Kerala. I am extremely happy to have with us Professor George Nipley, the chair of IUCN Species Specialist Group of Mangroves, and he has given us a global insight on what threat the mangroves are facing and what can be done to protect such biodiversity. Thank you, sir. And I thank Sri Vivek Menon, Executive Director, Wildlife Trust of India, for partnering with us and co-hosting this function on the International Mangrove Day. I thank Professor B.C. Chowdhury, who is the Executive Trustee and Senior Advisor of Aquatic Projects for Wildlife Trust of India, for taking lead in organizing this program. He has been a stalwart of conservation for the coastal and marine species. I thank Sri Sergeant John, Co-Principal Investigator of Marine Projects in Wildlife Trust of India, for giving the welcome address. I thank all the panelists, including Pramod G. Krishnan, IFS, Additional PCCF, Government of Kerala, Dr. A. Vijay Kumar, Professor and Head, Department of Aquatic Biology in University of Fisheries, Kerala, Dr. Vanaja T., Professor and Associate Director of Research, Kerala Agriculture University, Dr. Dineshan Cheruvat, Additional Director of Fisheries, Government of Kerala, Sri Ramit, who has been taking lots of pain in getting this program into a reality. All members and all participants who have come here and dedicated their time for this panel discussion. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Vinod. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for joining the inaugural session. Now we are starting the panel discussion. To start, I welcome Professor B.C. Chowdhury, sir, the Executive Trustee of Wildlife Trust of India, to take the session forward as the moderator. Sir.
Okay. Thanks, Ramit. I think we move to the second part of today's important event and event session, the panel discussion on the mangrove. The theme of the panel discussion is Future of Mangroves in Kerala. I think, as several speakers have pointed out in the morning, that the mangroves in Kerala are not as extensive as in other parts of the country. But whatever little mangroves are there, they are also in the privately owned ownership, and the government of Kerala is doing a human effort to bring the mangroves. They have already declared several hundred hectares as reserve forest, and they are trying to bring in, for the first time anywhere in the country, a huge amount of mangrove areas into paid and purchased mangroves to be protected. And that's probably the first step, but there would be a lot more steps, that could go to take care, increasing the area of mangrove coverage in the state, and also planning a future of the mangroves in the state. In our panel discussion today, we have the opening remark to be given by our eminent speaker, Professor Jolie, because he comes from Hong Kong. He gave an insight into the Maipo Reserve, which I had the fortune of seeing a couple of times, and what little mangroves are there, and how wonderfully mangrove fish culture and a lot of other things jointly, sustainably being done there, safeguarding the mangroves at the same time, including the livelihood of prospects of the area as well. We have Dr. Vijay Kumar from the University of Kerala. We have Dr. T. Vanaja, Kerala Agriculture University. We have Dinesh Chugrat, Additional Director of the Fisheries. And finally, we will have our dear friend, Mr. Pramod Kishan, who has been in the thick of conservation scenario right from his career beginning. And he would probably be talking a great deal about what exactly are the plans of the Kerala Forest Department to dovetail mangrove conservation into their conservation program. To begin with, I would invite Professor Jolie once again to begin his opening remark on the panel discussion. He may say, I have not visited India, and much less I know about Kerala, but his wide experience of being with mangrove conservation scenario across the world, and particularly in areas where the mangroves are not in such extensive coverage, what kind of a future one does look at. I think I would request Professor Jolie to give his opening remark in this panel discussion. Then I will go and request other speakers, other panelists to chip in their thoughts. Professor Jolie, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chowdhury. Well, I haven't been to Kerala, as I admitted earlier on, but I actually managed to find some information about the mangrove communities at this region. And as also have been pointed out by one of the previous speakers, your area in Kerala actually used to have a huge amount of mangrove forest in the past. And the information that I found, papers written about that region of India, also suggested that more than 95% of the mangrove forest have been lost from this region. Actually, a lot of that loss was really quite recent. And so, despite the fact that these communities are pretty diverse, the number in front of me is that you have or used to have 18 species of mangrove trees in this part of India. And so what I can see from this data is that, well, this location has the capacity to support very good, extensive, and healthy mangrove ecosystems. And the question is, well, you have a big job in front of you, because, well, historically, there is a huge amount of mangrove already lost. But with increasing recognition of the importance of mangroves, and also with the know-how of mangrove conservation, management, and restoration, then I think this area is of great potential, because, well, you know what the bottom line is, and you also know what condition of the mangrove ecosystems is at the moment. And so basically there is a very clear target, and there is also the know-how. If there is the will also, then a lot can be done. And so I don't actually want to actually occupy a lot of the time in which the local experts can actually voice their opinions, which are more context sensitive than I am. And so, but just to mention that you have a great location where mangroves used to be very abundant, and now for some reason they have actually gone down by a lot. But it also means that there is a lot to do, and this is actually a very highly potential area of very much promise for the future. So I look forward to joining the rest of the discussion, and I would very much be happy to contribute in whatever way I can, and also relate any relevant information back to the Mangrove Specialist Group. And so I also see that Professor Catherine is now actually part of the audience, and so well, I'm sure that the discussion would be very, very interesting and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lee. I think it's a great insight into your extensive knowledge and your suggestion that there is a great potential in Kerala with the number of species and the technological know-how that is available. I think yes, Dr. Kathiresan has been there in the previous years, giving his thoughts and insights, and he is present in the audience today. So we are in touch with him, and also the Forest Department is open to ideas and suggestions from professionals. So I think we will be seeing a better future for the mangroves in the state of Kerala. I was just informed that Dr. T. Vanaja, Professor and Associate Director of Research, Kerala Agricultural University, has an emergency meeting to attend. So I am rescheduling her to be invited first. She is the Director of Kaipad Area Development Society, which promotes cultivation of saline-tolerant paddy species. She has published more than 56 research papers and 7 books. She has developed and released 5 saline-tolerant paddy species. She has developed interspecific and intervertical breeds of pepper. She has bagged various awards, including Vanita Ratna, Krishi Vigyan Young Scientist, and Kerala government, and so on. So I am now inviting Dr. T. Vanaja, Professor and Associate Director of Research, and I think to give her insight into the government of Kerala's ambitious program of rice and fish, and how it has to deal with the mangrove areas as such. Over to Dr. T. Vanaja, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Hello, sir. Is it visible, my screen?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Respected dignitaries and all the experts, panelists, and all the presenters and all the participants. The emergency meeting is regarding Rebuild Kerala project review by Agriculture Production Commissioner by 11:30. Sorry for the inconvenience. Actually, I'm talking about rice cultivation system, as we called as Kaipad rice tract in northern Kerala of India, which is fringed by mangroves. This Kaipad tract exists in 3 districts of Kerala, Kannur mainly, then Kozhikode and Kasaragod. Now it is all about 3,108 hectares. In Kannur district, it is near the Valabhattanam River, Koppam, Mahi, Anjarakandi, and so many rivers. And the panchayats in Kannur are Ezhum, Pattam, Kannapuram, Cheruvun, and other so many panchayats, about 13 plus 9 in Kannur district. Regarding Kozhikode district, the Kaipad rice tract, which is fringed by mangroves, exists in the bank of Chaliyarpura, Kallaipura, Korapura, Panur, and there are also 16 plus panchayats are there. In Kasaragod district, this is the northernmost district of Kerala. Here the tract exists on the bank of mainly Chandragiri river. And these are the panchayats, around 16 panchayats. Regarding the Kaipad tract in 3 districts, there is difference. The actual Kaipar tract, which is very near to the sea, is seen in Kannur district, away from the residential area. But in Kozhikode and Kasaragod district, people intruded in the Kaipar tract and started residing, and there's a problem of that is objecting the saline intrusion and all. So the real Kaipar, which is in the virgin state, is Kannur Kaipar. And in Kannur itself, there are two areas, traditional Kaipar tract as well as the Katamballi area. In Katamballi area, the saline intrusion prohibited 60 years back, and now it is started rehabilitation, or it is they abandoned that project, now allowed the saline water intrusion. I am talking about the Kaipar tracts, that is along with the, we call in the African countries this particular rice cultivation mangrove farming. When I attended a conference in France, in that conference, while I presented varieties, rice varieties in Kaipar tract, which is fringed by mangroves, from Africa, they presented a mangrove farming. I thought of it as mangrove only, but actually they presented rice farming because the rice tract is fringed by mangroves. And this rice tract is, just I am talking about this Kaipar tract. It is a naturally organic tract, as all the panelists and before whoever talked about the biodiversity of the tract. It is rich in flora and fauna compared to the modern rice farming system. And there occurs 2 times water level, that is tidal inflow and outflow. You can see the bottom portion, this field is the tidal inflow, and you can see the mangroves fringed to the Kaipar tract. And there occurs twice in a day tidal inflow and outflow, and this is the same tract when there is tidal outflow. And regarding the ecosystem, it is a saline prone area, naturally organic, integrated mangrove farming system in which rice and aquaculture go together. That is, the tract is just like if you visualize a bangle, a green bangle, inside that bangle gold. So we can visualize this Kaipar tract like that one. So that green means it is fringed by mangroves, and the golden color means it is rice. So that is the Kaipar tract of northern Kerala. First crop season, that means this particular season, which started June, it starts with the rice cultivation and it goes up to October, and then afterwards there is aquaculture, that second crop season. And rice farming in this particular tract is carried out in a peculiar way, not like the rice planting we do, transplanting and all, or even in Japan SRI model. It's not like that. It's a peculiar way of rice farming in Kaipar. Single crop is cultivated in low to medium saline phase of production cycle during June to October. As you can see, during April, May, it will be very dry. You can see the white patches because of the salinity. So we had to remove that salinity before we start the cultivation. So the farmers will be taking mounds this tract, and the allowing during the monsoon season, June, after the 2 to 3 showers, the salinity will be leached at the bottom of this mound. After that, the farmers will rake this mound, and on this mound, the sprouted seeds will be sown. So that is the beginning of the process of cultivation. And then you can see these are the nursery that sprouted seeds became. This is 35-old nursery, mound nursery we call it. And after 35 days, the farmers will be dismantling these mounds, and then ladies will be spreading the seedlings. So you can see a kind of swimming and transplanting. So it's a very beautiful scene in Kaipar tract. And this is the tract which is spreaded right side, and now it has to be spreaded. Then method of transport of harvest. This area is a vast area. Since it is flooded, we have to depend upon the country boat and all to harvest. And nutrient recycling through decomposition of the crop residues happens here. Major part of the straw is left in the field for decomposition. The very important and of this tract is neither chemical fertilizers nor plant protection chemicals are used in both rice farming and shrimp farming. Hence, the entire produce from Kaipa tract is exclusively organics. That is the very important thing of this area. Aquaculture, it is a traditional capture-based one, which is done during rabi season, and method of filtration and prawn and fish, you can see the down photos. And regarding the rice cultivation here, since 2010, traditional varieties were cultivated, Kudiran or Kaima. And then the farmers complained regarding the defects of the local cultivars and what they represent regarding favorable qualities are. These traditional varieties are tolerant to salinity, but they are low yielding and they are lodging just like the staggered mode lodging and have awns and panicles are not compact. So their demand was to rectify this defect. So as a breeder, I am a plant breeding genetics scientist that doing the breeding aspect. So as per the demand of the farmers, Kerala Agriculture University intervened with the development of varieties to this tract. So the development and release of the saline tolerant high yielding rice varieties for the first time for the naturally organic farming saline prone sea coastal rice tract, which is fringed by mangroves. And the strategy was adopting organic plant breeding because we need a variety suitable to organic tract. At the same time, it should give high yield. So adopting this strategy and adopting farmer participatory evaluation, rather than confining the research in the research station, the entire evaluation stages were done in the farmer's field, a kind of farmer participatory evaluation. Then these are the methods adopted, and they conducted the entire variety development program in the farmer's field. And then these are different stages of evaluation, farmer participation, getting their opinion while conducting the research, what type of varieties they prefer, that and concluding the selection process along with the farmers. And finally, we will be discussing what type of variety they need without losing its good qualities. And at the same time, we have to add a favorable character as per their demands. So accordingly, 5 varieties, as Vivek sir pointed out, 5 varieties were developed and released: Heirloom 1, Heirloom 2, Heirloom 3, and Heirloom 4. And Mithila, I'm not talking about all the characteristics of these varieties, but these are the first saline tolerant high yielding varieties of saline prawn kaipad and first organic rice varieties in the world. And this is the viewpoint of the tract before execution of the project, with the low yielding lodging traditional cultivar with the intermediate panicles on grades, making the tract less productive and harvest process a difficult one. So after the execution of the project with high yielding, the tract is look like this, with high yielding non-lodging rice varieties with compact panicle and onless grains, converting the tract a highly productive one and making the harvest process comparatively an easy task. Because the farmers' demand was, if it is lodging, the task of harvest, bending and then collecting from all the sides is a difficult one. That also in the flooded tract, which is not that mechanized. And the next intervention by the university was formation of the stakeholder society for this tract. We formed in 2010 Malabar Kaipad Farmer Society for the welfare of the tract, and as a management working food security army. And 2014, as I already told, it is an organic tract and it is a particular ecosystem. So I applied for geographical indication tag, and that GI was awarded in 2014. As you see this symbolic of, or this logo of this Kaipad rice, you can see one of the main ingredients is the mangrove fringed by mangroves, and this is rice. And this is prone, just like an integrated farming system. So the sole proprietor of Kaipad rice, which got or which secured geographical indication tag is Malabar Kaipad Farmer Society, the stakeholder society. And then 2020 onwards, Kerala Agriculture University started empowering the stakeholder society through three Rebuild Kerala program. One that is the review meeting that is going on 11:30, that is already started. In that Rebuild Kerala project, the main aim is empowering the society to protect this tract and enhance the cultivation, and which is because even though there is area more than 3,000, only 30% cultivation is going on because of the area is kept fallow because of the weeds, including tree weeds. So that tract comprehensive development is needed, and the Kaipad rice, which got GI, we have to strengthen the marketing of that Kaipad rice. So we already started the marketing. Now we are doing the domestic marketing, because we have to aware the farmers and public of our Kerala to eat good food, because it is a nutritionally rich rice from Kerala. So we are doing that one. We started that one. We kept the rice from Kasaragod district to Ernakulam, and also Secretariat in Trivandrum. So that we have to strengthen. Afterwards, we'll be thinking about the next venture will be export market. And we also started that mall with giving gruel, rice gruel, kanji we call in Malayalam, Kerala. That gruel and other byproducts of the Kaipad rice, like rice flake, puttupadi, ariyunda, and other things, we are already started marketing. And considering the importance of this tract, 2019 onwards, Kerala government started an agency called Kaipad Area Development Society. So, Honorable Minister of Agriculture is the chairman of this agency, and this agency started working. The problem of this tract now is lack of mechanization, just like other rice growing area. And another one which I want to emphasize here is the tree weed intrusion making Kaipad fallow. This need intervention of the forest department. So, hello. Okay, is it audible?
Yeah, it's audible.
Okay. So here, what I have to tell is that area I already mentioned, it is fringed by mangroves, and I told the tract should be just like a bangle filled with golden rice. But now the tract is seeing like that green bangle is intruded inside. That is our mangroves. Because the mangroves, as you know, it will be easily establishing. So if the farmers leave this Kaipad tract without cultivation, even for 2 or 3 years, these mangroves will come inside and establish. So now when they aware and rehabilitate that mangroves on the fringes, there is problem from forest department also, because it is, as you called, reserve mangroves, and like that it is coming in forest department giving an objection and all. These are all the that's problem they are now facing. So my request is, we cannot substitute mangroves for rice and rice for mangroves. We should have a holistic approach. So my request to this forum also, give a resolution to protect organic rice bowl, because it is a peculiar ecosystem, naturally organic, and when we cultivate the rice, the biodiversity enhances, and it is an area which can protect from flood, because it has the capacity to give the water to the ground more than the other reservoirs. Rather than it is giving food, and it is nutrition, because it can serve food security. The same, it gives nutrition security, and also it's a big water reservoir. And with the GI of Kaipad rice, GI branded Kaipad rice, the small and marginal farmers, they are not big farmers. If they are big farmers, they would have attained a lot of money before itself, because in the export market they might have given the rice, and their livelihood security might have secured. But they are small and marginal farmers. We have to support them. So my request is to support the farmers. We have to protect the Kaipad ecosystem. At the same time, the mangroves on the fringe. So as we are concerned about the mangroves, we should equally concern about the Kaipad ecosystem, which play a great role in preventing flood, at the same time providing food security, nutrition security, water security, and livelihood security. So my request is, let us have a holistic approach. And regarding the tourism of the Kandal area or the mangrove area or the Kaipad ecosystem, my suggestion is it should be of responsible tourism, because this area is rehabilitated, or it is that farmers are SCST farmers are there, and the other small farmers are there. We can give living so many activities we can club along with this third. So with this, I'm ending my talk. Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizers for inviting for this short, brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vanija. I think, you have a meeting to go, and otherwise, it would have been some interaction with you. I think, you talked about holistic the approach to your Kaipad cultivation, Kaipad as well as mangrove conservation. Yes. I think, it's important for us to know, while there is an economic benefit coming out of Kaipad cultivation, they don't see the economic benefit coming out of the fringing mangroves. I think, this is where the mangroves tend to be losing out. We need to find a balancing act of how to, how not to overexpose the Kaipad cultivation in such a way that they also encroach into the fringing mangrove areas. At the same time, I think what we need to do is, how the mangrove areas will not increase into the Kaipad cultivation. But what is worrying at this point of time is the economic benefit that is associated with the Kaipad cultivation, and the economic benefit of the fringing mangroves has not been worked out so extensively. I think it needs to be worked out how much contribution the mangroves are giving to the Kaipad cultivation, and what kind of benefits, what kind of economic benefit the mangrove fringing benefits giving to the Kaipad cultivation. I think this is something which need to be worked out. And in the long run, I think an understanding that the mangroves are actually losing out in the Kerala state, I think we need to do everything possible to safeguard the mangroves. I think we will probably have a longer and better discussion at a different time frame. Time is too short this time. Maybe we will have a special session on Kaipad cultivation and mangroves in Kerala. That would be useful at the long run. Thank you very much, Dr. Varnaja. You have a meeting to attend. So,
okay, sir, with your permission, I am leaving this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. I will now invite Dr. Vijay Kumar, Professor and Head Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, University of Kerala. Vijay is known for his huge number of publications, research experience, and over 30 years in the field of taxonomy, biodiversity documentation, aquatic biology, and fisheries. He has guided more than 14 PhD students. He is also the author and editor of several books. Personally, I know Vijay for a very long years, and we would like to hear his insight into the future of mangrove conservation in the state of Kerala. Over to you, Vijay.
Okay, thank you, DC sir, respected Professor Lee and Professor Consolidation and all the other dignitaries. Friends, I just in the next 10 minutes, I'll just present my views on how we can go ahead with the conservation of mangroves in Kerala. Please understand that the mangrove stretch in Kerala is maybe around 4,000 square kilometer hectare now, and which is only probably 0.15% of the country's total geographical area, as per the latest forest State of the Forest Report of India. And first of all, should be a clarification that, unlike the east coast of India, the west coast of India, the small rivers that drain into the Arabian Sea, we have a very peculiar ecosystem which is not conducive for extent stretches of mangroves as far as Kerala is concerned. And that is the reason why we have the mangroves limited primarily to the river mouths of Kerala, and that is one thing. And second, I would start with my perception on the current extent of mangroves as far as Kerala is concerned. And everybody actually quote as a baseline data, and what is actually the limitation with conservation is that we lack a baseline data, a very strong baseline data, and we shift the baselines. And this is what is called the shifting baseline hypothesis, which is forwarded by Farley, and that is also prevalent here, because everybody quote the data of 1975 data of Glasgow, which says that Kerala had 70,000 hectare of the mangroves, and let it be there. But all the current estimates say that this is less than 5,000 hectare, in whichever way you calculate that. And my first the suggestion is to have a very strong database of the mangroves and the ecosystem services, which is not seriously worked out except for some specific ecosystems. And second is actually to have a broader picture about the biodiversity of the mangroves in Kerala, in order to realize the potential, the economic value and potential of the ecosystem. Because in the last few years itself, we have described a few number of traps, and some are actually in the pipeline, which indicate that there are large number of undescribed species from the ecosystem, which ultimately will help in evaluating the ecosystem and ecosystem services. So my second suggestion is to have a broader picture, in a deeper understanding about the ecosystem services of the mangroves, which are quite unique as far as Kerala is concerned. And I'm sure that the loss of mangroves in the last few years are tremendous, especially the reasons being the promotion of aquaculture on one side, and of course the development of tourism on the other side. And there are also a lot of conflicts which are now going on with the Fisheries Department, with the Tourism Department, and there are political interventions where a stretch of mangrove may be eliminated there. And also mangroves are growing up in some areas, and they're adding up to the areas which were not actually the mangrove habitats earlier. And these are the issues. And if you look at the from the 70,000 hectare, now it is less than 50,000 hectare, thanks to the effort of some of the the initiatives, including that of the Forest Department and Kandal projects. There are now the mangrove areas are increasing. And of course, I'm sure that Mr. Pramod will talk on the initiatives of the Forest Department, because the mangroves, half of the mangroves at present in Kerala is in the private ownership, and it poses a lot of difficulties as far as conserving them is concerned. And I'm not going into the interventions by the Forest Department, which are welcome at this point of time. And my next suggestion is to have the science of mangrove restoration reworked as far as Kerala is concerned. We cannot actually go typically with the the international set of principles which are set for forwarded for the mangrove restoration, because it's a very different kind of an ecosystem. And there is also, after this very, very serious sea erosion happening all along the Kerala coast in the recent past, there is actually a proclamation that all the 590 kilometer Kerala coast can be protected with the mangrove forest, which of course is not possible, because it has it need a conducive ecosystem, a highly dynamic kind of an ecosystem for the ecosystem to flourish. You can plant mangroves, but that doesn't mean that you can actually restore the mangrove ecosystem per se. So that means we have to have a plan. We have to have local models where we have seriously scientifically go for a mangrove restoration process. And that is another kind of a thing, because the Western Indian Ocean region, we have the guidelines for mangrove ecosystem restoration forwarded by UNEP now. And another thing is that all the strategies are all project based now. And I always I request this group to have a plan for a long time continuous plan, because the problem with the government and sponsored project is that it is for 3 years or few years, and after that will end. and there will not be any continuity, and there should be a continuity for all these exercises. This is another suggestion for the preservation of mangroves in Kerala. And then the community involvement. There are now process of community involvement initiated, and the Wildlife Institute of India has suggested a large number of new conservation sites all along the Kerala coast. Most of them are in the river mouths and in the mangrove areas. If you really wanted to have that kind of a program implemented through the forest department, and then we should have some kind of a co-management exercise happening in Kerala, and because there are multiple stakeholders and conflict of interest all along the coast of Kerala. So if the program of Rebuild Kerala is to build back better, and then we should have a long-term strategy for mangrove conservation. Especially there is a purposeful trial to link ecotourism also with that. Absolutely no issue. But once you link the ecotourism issue with that, and the community involvement and the local livelihood connected with the mangrove ecosystem should remain intact. Otherwise, this is not going to be a successful endeavor. That is why I suggest that all these kind of community involvement program should evolve gradually as a co-management system where the communities may also get their benefits out of that. And there are few models, and that kind of a model should actually happen in Kerala. And so that we can also consider this as a blue carbon ecosystem in future. That's the way in which we can also finally we can link the whole process of mangrove restoration with the climate adaptation also, or rebuilding in the rebuilding Kerala exercise. And another thing is that we have to actually mobilize resources. And what is happening in Kerala is there is a strong input from the forest department, but that resources is not enough. Considering the complexity of the coastal area now, and the enormity of the climate change related issues happening there, and also conflict of interest between the stakeholders, we need to have a larger, we have to mobilize special resources, and a special cells should be there to carry out and the build back all these things in a better manner. And finally, what I will say is that there is also a problem which is the least discussed, and Professor Lee has actually pointed out, and that is an increasing issue of the invasive species. And many of the estuaries in Kerala, which we have reported first in many of the estuaries in Kerala, is actually the presence of an invasive mussel called Mytilla strigata, the charu mussel, which was there in the southern part of the America, which is now established in many of the areas. It has affected the clam fishery in Vempanar Lake. It has affected the green mussel fishery in many of the lakes. So this is one which we have to actually take into account when we actually plan for the biodiversity restoration of mangroves. And then we should have some kind of an innovative programs where the important people or organizations can be a partner of this exercise, rather than forest department alone, which will always have some kind of a fund limitation. So a mangrove partner program can also be started, so that some of the people who can actually invest in this kind of a process can also contribute to this kind of a restoration program, because we are now into the decade of UN decade of restoration. And there are some of the the palmlets prepared by the mangrove, the Kandal project in Kannur is also wonderful, and that kind of an awareness material also should be there, where we will purposefully involve the local communities, the students, and the younger generation into the conservation process. So these are my suggestions in the initial round. Thank you.
Thank you, Viju. Thank you very much for an insight, for a way forward approach, I think, in your talk. I think we will discuss that at the end. I will summarize at the end. I would now invite Dr. Dinesan Cheruvat, Additional Director of Fisheries, Government of Kerala. Being the Additional Director of Fisheries of Government of Kerala, Dr. Dinesan has vast experience on the shrimp farming and aquaculture practices and its policies. As a member of the State CRZ Authority, he served as an expert member of the State Wetland Authority of Kerala. He has done his PhD on Kaipad and mangroves. He served as the member secretary of the Kerala State Biodiversity Board. So with your manifested interest in many different areas, and on the fisheries sector, I think it would be interesting if you can refocus your attention into aquaculture in mangrove fringed or mangrove areas, adding value for mangroves. That rather than adding value for fisheries, if you can focus your attention on adding value for mangrove, it would be ideal for the theme of today's program. Thank you very much. Dr. Dineshan, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary sir, and all the dignitaries and the participants of this webinar. So, Professor Vijay Kumar has already dealt with many of the important things on mangroves of Kerala. Still, I would also like to raise certain concerns and finally to the suggestions made by Chaudhary sir. Then my first concern is we all celebrate a lot of days, environmental days, forest days, mangrove days, and earth days, and biodiversity days. So many days regarding conservation of our ecosystem we celebrate. Still, in the state of Kerala, where the estuarine systems are very important, very important for even for our very existence and livelihood. What is the current status? How much the estuarine system or the coastal wetlands do we have now after 50 or 100 years? I think sometimes we hear only half exist, sometimes we hear only 1/3 exist. What is the situation of Vebanad Lake, largest wetland, one of the largest estuarine wetland system of India, maybe the first or second wetland system of India? Only 1/3 of that much coastal area exists, coastal wetlands exist. In other areas also, there is a very fast decline of our estuarine systems, including that of mangroves. And just Dr. Vijay Kumar was saying how much mangroves do we have now? And 10 years back, we got a figure of 45 square kilometers. Then now we hear that there are 17 square kilometers and sometimes 9 square kilometers and sometimes 5 square kilometers. We don't have a baseline data on the mangroves that actually exists in the coastal wetlands of Kerala. So since we are all aware, our government is aware, our public is aware, environmentalists are aware, everybody is aware that these are very important ecosystems, coastal ecosystems. And for us, it very well support fishery, and the Department of Fisheries very well recognizes the importance of mangroves for sustaining our fishery resources. And not only for our estuarine fishery resources, even for marine fisheries resources, because many of the commercially important marine fisheries resources like shrimp, crabs, and fish do depend on these coastal wetlands, especially mangroves, for completing at a certain stage of their life cycle. So when there is a fast decline, once there was a 700 square kilometers, now just 5 square kilometer or 9 square kilometer, then naturally there is fast decline of our fishery resources, including our inland fishery resources, also marine fisheries resources. For estuarine systems, as we know, there are species from marine areas coming over this area for breeding, or sometimes for raising the young ones that we generally call the nursery grounds. And sometimes breeding grounds, sometimes nursery grounds. Even there are some upstream species coming down to these estuarine systems for at certain stages of this life cycle. So when we consider the ecosystem service values, which was mentioned by the previous speakers, we know these estuarine systems, including mangroves, are one of the richest, where the biologically the best systems, that the biological production is more in these ecosystems, and the ecosystem service values are more than many of the land-based ecosystems like forests. And do we all also know that most of the even 80 to 90% of the photosynthetic oxygen are coming from the water bodies, mainly the wetlands, and the coastal wetlands being more productive liberates more atmosphere. And biodiversity are very rich in biodiversity. And the previous speaker, Dr. Vanaja, has dealt about the Kaipad ecosystems, the Kaipad agro ecosystem, and we have the Pokali ecosystems in central Kerala. And these Pokali Kaipad ecosystems are known as the mangrove-based paddy farming in eastern coast of Africa. Mangrove-based, definitely it is fringed with mangroves. If you are not cultivating paddy in Pokali or Kaipad, naturally by 5 or 10 years, that area will be converted to mangroves, another important ecosystem. But these Pokali and Kaipad are also important for ensuring our food security or livelihood security, or sometimes our nutrition security and health security also, because these Pokali and Kaipad being an integrated organic farming system, and sometimes I would like to say it's a biodiversity agriculture system, because even in paddy farming area, biodiversity is very much, even if we compare with the mangroves. So there should be a balance in management for protecting this mangrove ecosystem that is growing in these Pokali and Kaipad lands. And our Department of Fisheries is implementing one project for restoration of these Pokali and Kaipad systems under the NAFCC, that is National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change, in which when we create bunds for protecting these Pokali and Kaipad lands, we are planting mangroves on the outer periphery of these bunds. So far, we have till last month we have planted around 52,000 numbers of mangroves in the outer periphery of the bunds, and that process is continued. So the department is very much aware of the importance of mangroves. But there were instances in the past when some of these potential wetlands were converted into aquaculture ponds, mainly the shrimp ponds. So I think personally, I'm sure that the conversion of such ecosystems like Pokali, Kaipad, or mangrove ecosystems should not be converted into monoculture aquaculture farms. So that's very, very, very important. Still, we have the traditional shrimp filtration areas without any inputs, any input of seed, feed, or any other inputs. We can have the yield. In earlier literature, if you go through the literatures of 1940s and 50s, there were more than 1 ton fish production from a single hectare area of these Pokali, Kaipad, and mangrove lands through filtration only, traditional filtration only. So the fisheries, as far as the fisheries concerned, these wetlands, including mangrove wetlands, are very, very important for conserving our rich fisheries resources of marine, estuarine, and our inland systems. And regarding the management measures, I just want to raise one thing. I think my friends in Forest Department would take care of it, because we have the best protection measures provided under CRZ regulation in 1991 or the 2011 or the recent 2019 notification. It is placed in the most important, ecologically important areas of CRZ 1A. So that much protection we have given. Till it is from 1991. Then we have passed 20 years, and how many mangroves we have lost? Do we have a mangrove management plan under this coastal regulation zone? Even the tourist department has the tourism plan being a part of our coastal zone management plan. Tourism department, they have prepared a tourism plan for inclusion in the coastal zone management plan. And we, the Fisheries Department, are also preparing a plan, and which will be submitted very soon. Within 3-4 days, we'll be submitting a fisheries management plan for integrating with the coastal zone management plan. So, in which we have also mentioned the importance of mangroves and certain measures to be taken for conservation of mangroves. But my opinion, we should have a mangrove management plan for this coastal zone management plan. That is very, very important, and that plan is being completed within. I think by next month it will be put forward for the public hearing. So in which we should have a balance, as Dr. Vanaja said, we should have these traditional agro ecosystems like Pokali and Kaipad, which is a 2,000 or 4,000 years old system and still surviving, trying to surviving, but its area is fast declining. Earlier we had 24,000 hectares of Pokali lands in central Kerala. Now we have only just over 8,000 hectares. Earlier we had 4,000 plus hectares of Kaipad lands in North Kerala. Now we have less than 2,000 hectares. So every ecosystems, the coastal ecosystems like mangrove ecosystems and mangrove-based ecosystems like this Kaipad and Pokali are fast declining everywhere. So we should have a proper management plan, especially under this CRZ notification. We are having a coastal zone management in which there should be a mangrove management plan, and which will strive to protect whatever the mangroves that exist now, and also for afforestation of more suitable areas. Afforestation doesn't mean that all the coastal areas should be planted with the mangroves, because in Kannur there was an instance in Madakara, which was a mud flat where thousands of migratory waterfowls visited. In my college days, we used to visit those areas to see the migratory waterfowls, including flamingos. But those mud flats were converted to mangrove forest. so we should have a balance. Each ecosystems have its own unique values like mangroves. So all the coastal ecosystems should be protected by striking a balance between these paddy fields, these mud flats, these mangroves, and everything. So we should have an integrated plan by considering all these aspects. Then in CRZ notification, there are provisions for tourism even in mangroves. So tourism has for Kerala, our one of the major revenue earning area is this tourism. So we cannot do away with the tourism. But when we plan tourism in mangrove areas, we should be cautious, and such a tourism project should not cost much on the existing mangrove area. So there should be, I think, there should be a healthy dialogues between the forest department and the tourism department and the fisheries department, agriculture department, to sort out that issue, to strike a balance for conserving whatever the mangroves and the other ecosystem we have now. And our head of forest force, Keshavan sir, has just mentioned about the bioshield, and Professor Vijay Kumar also mentioned it. In coastal area, especially in sandy beaches, we may not be able to plant mangrove as many advocates, but there are certain mangrove associate species. Our KFRI has identified many, I think more than 16 species has been identified by them for coastal afforestation, many of which can be considered as mangrove associates, which also may provide some the livelihood, like certain medicinal plants like morinda or some other plants may provide some livelihood support to our coastal community. So if the ecosystem, particular ecosystem, provides some livelihood support to the coastal community, definitely they will strive to protect all these ecosystems. So that is what I would like to add with the comments made by the other speakers. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Chowdhury, and all others for listening to me. Thank you once again, Joe.
Thanks, Dinesh. I think your approach of a cautious integration of all systems and safeguarding everyone's interest is a way forward. I think we will discuss at the end. I think when I'm summarized, I will probably talk about that. I would now like to invite our friend Dr. Pramod Kishran, Additional Principal Chief Conservator of Forest Government of Kerala. He is leading the Mangrove Acquisition Program as the Nodal Officer, Rebuild Kerala Development Program of Kerala Government. He also served as the Joint Director in the Wildlife. He has many years of wilderness experience, Pramod, and he's also served as the Field Director of the Perambikulam Tiger Reserve, Deputy Director of the Periyar Tiger Reserve. I think with his term at the UNDP, Government of India, I think his association with the planning processes and integrating planning processes has been very long association. I think probably the right place at this point of time. Mangrove conservation, mangroves future in Kerala, in the I wouldn't say complementing or conflicting demand from other sources such as locally ecosystem, Kaipad ecosystem, fisheries, agriculture, and so on. I think over to Pramod to give an overview of what is the plan of the Kerala government as far as the mangrove conservation and future goes. Over to Pramod. Unmute. Pramod, you have to unmute. Yeah, you're unmuted.
So we cannot.
No, we can't hear you. Yeah.
കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല sir. ഇല്ല കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല. It's unmuted, but we can't hear you. So I think there are some connectivity issue from his end.
audible now?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you. BC sir, nice to meet you after a long time. And okay, hope you're keeping well. Okay.
Yes,
Well,
I'm fine. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Now, see, I will broadly say two things. One, what are the initiatives of Kerala Forest Department as well as Kerala government on this? Number two, maybe the challenges faced by the mangrove conservation sector in Kerala. So I will start with maybe the initiatives rather than starting with the challenges, as a different way of telling things. See, the strategy goes like this. Kerala has, it is estimated, going by the literature, it was estimated that at the turn of maybe 100 and maybe the 19th or 20th century beginning, Kerala had around 700 square kilometers of mangroves. Now, Forest Department, we have done a very, very quick reconnaissance assessment of the mangroves of Kerala, I think just 1 year ago. And that is, it is estimated that currently we have about 24 square kilometers of mangroves across the coastal districts of Kerala. Okay. Now, out of these 24 square kilometers, roughly 12 square kilometer is available with the various government agencies, and 12 square kilometer is with the various private agencies, or rather under private ownership. Okay. So this is one aspect. Right? Exactly 50% of them are under government ownership, some kind of government ownership, and not necessarily with the Forest Department. Okay, and roughly 12 square kilometer that is with under private ownership. Okay. Now, if you take that 50% of the total mangrove extent, okay. Now see, I understand the over obsession, that concern pointed out by the chief guest, the main speaker today. But notwithstanding that, because we understand that before we getting into functionality of mangrove ecosystems, consolidating whatever little is, that's also very, very important, because we are just, that's a serious concern in a densely populated state like Kerala, or country like India, number one. Anyway, so out of that, what you call 12 square kilometer area under government ownership, roughly about 4.8 square kilometer is already with the Forest Department. Okay. There is one community reserve, and there are also a major chunk of this 4.8 square kilometer is also under reserve forest status, number one. Rest of the area is with maybe Coast Guard, then Fisheries Department is having some area under them. Then the Naval Academy at Erimala, they are having mangrove forest with them. Then some of the panchayats like in Ernakulam, Maradu Panchayat is having mangrove forest with them. So these are the various government agencies owning what you call chunks of mangrove forest of Kerala, number one. So we require a very different strategy to deal with these agencies. Okay, number one. Now the other half, the other 50% is under private ownership. So after the 2018 floods, the Kerala, as you know, that we are in the process of reconstructing ourselves. There is a specific program for that, that is called Rebuild Kerala Development Program. It's a multidisciplinary approach. So Forest Department is an important partner in this program, right from the mountain landscape to the coastal areas. Okay, so one of the component projects under this Rebuild Kerala Development Program is the consolidation of the mangrove forest of Kerala. Okay, we have kept around 120 crore rupee. So that's not a small amount. 120 crore Indian rupees. 1,200 million INR for this particular program, okay, for consolidating all the mangrove forest of Kerala, number one. Okay, now that process has just started, and it's a long drawn process. As you know, land acquisition is not an easy thing, because many a times, people have to be compensated adequately. So far, what we have been facing in Kerala was that though we knew a lot about mangroves and the need for acquisition, etc., practically we didn't have money. But fortunately, as of now, there is an earmarked project for this, and that process is actually going on. So let us hope that when maybe in another couple of years, probably we will gain some substantial headway into the acquisition of some of these mangroves. Okay, so that is with regard to the what you call the current state of mangroves of Kerala from a project perspective. Okay. Now, having said that, I would also just try to flag a few issues. Okay. Number one, which is these are some of the challenges that will have some serious bearings on the future of mangrove conservation in Kerala. Okay. Number one, see, it is all the more important that we consolidate as much area under mangrove cover as fast as possible. Okay, time is running fast, So see, this is an academic discussion. So I can say that, whatsoever name we may call it, whether it is what we call coexistence, whether it is sustainable development, whether it is livelihood farming, whatever it is, I've seen over the years that, all these comes largely at the cost of mangrove ecosystems. Okay, so whereas it may be necessary that in certain areas we may have to look forward to having maybe what we call other land users also within the mangrove ecosystem, like say for example the rice paddy cultivation or rice farming or fisheries, or maybe some kind of tourism also. It may be coming, but what I'm saying is that before we may also require some intact mangrove ecosystems. Okay, so that time is actually fast running out. Okay, so some of the first concerns and considerations is to consolidate as much as pure mangrove ecosystem as fast as possible. Okay, in Kerala. So that is one concern. So but this is not an obsession as pointed out by the in his inaugural speech, because this is a serious issue. Because if you don't have actually the substrate, and then how to talk about then what to talk about the functionality within that. Okay, so that is number one. Okay, so for that consolidation, two approaches, as I mentioned. For the private sector, we are adopting the concept of paying them compensation and taking it over. Okay, number one. Number two, for the government sector, the idea is, see, the taking over may not work automatically, because some of these are defense installations also. Okay, so they have their own requirement, but practically the best thing is actually to sensitize them. And probably forest department can what we call provide the technical input to them. That is number one issue. The number two issue is that of the governance. What kind of a governance arrangement we will impart in a mangrove ecosystem? That's the issue. Because the forest department is traditionally preoccupied with the terrestrial template of conservation, which is people exclusive and what you call isolationist. So this may not work in the case of mangrove ecosystem. Okay, coastal and mangrove ecosystem per se. Okay, so we have commissioned one major study. This is not it's an applied research program. One, to map all the major potential mangrove growing areas of Kerala, and also to come out with a detailed institutional arrangement for governing these areas with the people's participation, with all these principles in mind: conservation, livelihoods, etc., those in mind. Okay, so this will be site specific, extremely site specific. So probably we may have to look forward to that. Site specificity is going to be a major concern for what we call mangrove governance of different areas of Kerala in future. So that is number one. Number three, maybe the academic community, we may have to think a little bit more about the coexistence. Okay, because it's very easy to say that today's discussion itself, you would have seen the multiple what we call interest that is coming on mangroves. There are interest of mangrove tourism, there are interest of fisheries, there are interest of farming communities, there are interest of what we call the conservation sector. So what is that right balance? So how do we arrive at that? So this is one serious concern. Actually, probably we should devote a little bit more time in the times to come. Okay. Now, with regard to the conservation approaches followed by the forest department or many other agencies in the country, I would say, because I have some experience of looking at or taking part in such programs in the the Malvan coast, western coast of India, as well as in the Koringa coast also. But what I've seen is that many times when you talk about mangrove reforestation, restoration program, we invariably start with Avicennia and Rhizophora. Okay. Yeah. Whereas, this is very important that, and also seldom we make any distinction between mangrove forests as well as littoral forests. So there is a notion that, maybe the entire coastal area of Kerala can be planted with mangroves, and that will be the panacea against maybe the surging sea storms and coastal tides, etc. Okay, whereas, as we all know that actually the mangroves thrive in a very complex salinity environment. Okay, there is a gradient also. Different species thrive in different salinity gradient. So probably, with regard to species selection, zonation, etc., also, we require actually more research and more applied what you call science. Okay, so I mean, I think I'm not taking much time. I stop here because 2-3 things, as I said. One is we need to consolidate. Then restoration, we need more actual knowledge. We need to really build our knowledge with regard to what you call how do we actually reconstruct our mangroves. Then how do we dovetail the what you call different interest of what you call the production sector as well as the conservation sector. At the same time, not getting into the trap of the terrestrial template of conservation mooted largely by the forest department. So what is the right balance? Probably, these are some of the questions which we may have to look forward to years to come. Thank you at this stage.
Thanks, Pramod, for the insight, that you gave of the government of Kerala's, path forward for the mangrove conservation. I think, practically all panel speakers talked about their concern about the mangroves, while their focal interest on the different subject areas like fisheries, like agriculture, and so on, they talked about. And the two speakers, Biju and Pramod, Pramod gave the governance, challenges in governance, coexistence and right balance in all sectors, more research in restoration methods, and so on. And I think it was important to know from Pramod, allocation of 120 crores for acquisition of mangroves. That's a great information that was required. While I would have preferred to summarize, all panelists' thought processes, I would refrain from doing so because we have overshot our time by almost 25 minutes already. But I would like to request Professor Lee, after having heard from different panelists the situation in Kerala, which he was not so much aware of, I think, what would be his take-home message after hearing to the speakers, after hearing to the panelists from multiple sectors. Professor Lee, your last words, your final words on the panel discussion after hearing to various speakers on the panel discussion. Professor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Professor Chowdhury. I think one lesson I've learned again through this panel discussion today is that we have to understand that conservation is a complex business because it requires strong science underpinning, but it also has a social dimension and political dimension. And in the case of Kerala, then we know that, as I said earlier on, there used to be a lot of mangroves in the area. So now we have maybe about 3% left. But on the other hand, there is a reason for that decrease. For example, there is the need for food production, whether it's actually seafood or rice cultivation. And so that's why I said earlier on in my talk that conservation and management of mangroves, on the one hand, we should set good goals. For example, the good goals for Kerala is actually the original very luxurious forest on this coastline. So we know that from this fact that mangroves actually thrive here. And so this is actually a natural ecosystem of the area. But on the other hand, we have to respect the history of rice cultivation, fisheries production, and also the use of this habitat, this coastline by the people there. And so that's why any conservation strategy and management strategy for a place has to be context sensitive. So I don't think I'm advocating the same goal and targets for all mangrove conservation and restoration projects. But with due respect to all the things that are actually going on in an area, we just have to have a holistic plan for mangroves. And that's actually also one point raised by one of the speakers. Have a perspective incorporating all the scientific, the social, and even political constraints and considerations, then we come up with the best solution for mangroves. And I think that's actually one thing I just like to put forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lee, for your last word. I think, and I would like to thank all the panelists, who took their time and spoke about the mangrove conservation in Kerala. I think, it couldn't have been a better thing to do than discuss a mangrove conservation issue for a state like Kerala, which is in the country's most educationally advanced state. And I think, very conscious about the conservation requirements of everything. It's also the state, which has the best tourism development you can think of anywhere in the country, God's own country. And I think tourism is probably best developed. So I think, it's probably important at this point of time to think of adding value for privately owned 12 square kilometers of mangroves, so that, they can actually think, yes, mangrove has also something to pay. While doing that, I think, the rest of the 12 square kilometers which are in the government setup, as Dr. Mr. Pramod talked about, to provide the technical know-how to the other government departments, how they can safeguard, how they can take care of the mangroves under their care. So I think that can take care of the 12 square kilometers of the mangroves which they are talking about. I think in a lot of privately owned mangroves can probably be owned by the forest department in the future years to come, because at least 1,200 million Indian rupees are available to own those lands. But I think, as everyone has pointed out, all speakers have pointed out, and including Pramod Kishan, it is extremely important to think of a long-term management plan for the mangrove conservation in Kerala. I think that is something, which has been rightly emphasized. But it was good that I think, the Pokali ecosystem and the Kaipad ecosystem and the rice and fish in the mangrove fringed areas and their interest, the tourism department's interest, I think, and other departments' interest in the mangrove system. I think, all this has been very well pointed out in the panel discussion. I think this gives the Wildlife Trust of India and our team a good background information to write something, and probably a white paper on the future of the mangroves in Kerala. Maybe the WTI will embark on developing a white paper based on the panel discussion today, and develop a small white paper, the path forward for mangrove conservation in Kerala. We would like to share it with all the panelists. We would like to share it with Professor Lee. We would like to share it with, the other interested people, and to seek their opinion, and then probably chart a path forward for in the next immediate future of the next 5 years or the next 10 years, what should be the way forward for the mangrove conservation in India. I think, the catchword here is conservation, not protection. I think protection is total protection, not allowing anything. I think conservation is sustainable use also is included in that. And therefore, we will be using the word conservation. A path forward for mangrove conservation in Kerala would be a white paper that we would like to produce as the Wildlife Trust of India, the non-governmental organization in the sphere of mangrove conservation. I think, our exposure to mangrove conservation and mangrove through the Kannur Kandal project in Kerala has given us some insight. But I think, the information today, the discussion today, has actually also given us a further inroad into our thought processes. And we would like to do a small attempt in making a small paper as to what should be the approach of mangrove conservation, taking the focal interest of all the agencies which are involved in mangrove fringed areas and other areas, livelihood areas and other areas. And we would like to produce a small document and that we can share with everybody. Thank you very much. At this point of time, I would like to ask the host and the co-host, do they still want to open it, and we can close this. And now over to Sajan John and Ramit to take these proceedings forward. Thank you very much. Over to Sajan and Ramit.
Thank you, sir. That was an interesting panel discussion. I think we got lots of insight regarding the conservation of mangrove this time, because we have to find a middle solution of conservation as well as the protection. So that was a really good panel discussion, sir. So now I would like to conclude the session here, because we have already overshot 30 minutes. So I think this was a really good participation, and I thank Professor Jolie for spending almost like more than 2.5 hours with us. Really grateful to you, and all the other expert panel members who have been contributing their knowledge to kind of come up with a better solution for the mangrove conservation of Kerala. And thank you all the participants for your valuable time, and let's celebrate the International Mangrove Day. Thank you all.
Good.
Requesting host to please end the meeting.